Today we're going to discuss some concepts around what you can do to manage or increase, improve security and privacy within Sage 300. And just to be clear, this isn't the discussion around securing your entire IT environment and VPNs and remote access and those sorts of things. It's really focused on what happens inside of Sage 300 and some of the security and privacy options within Sage 300. So that's what we'll focus on for the next 20 minutes or so here. We should have some time for questions at the end. Yeah, feel free to type those into the chat as they come to your head, and we'll address them at the end. So here's some things we'll talk about. We'll just clarify a couple of conceptual points here and differentiate some of the different types of things we're talking about. We'll talk about some of the new things that have been added recently to Sage 300. We'll dig into some of the types of data that you can restrict or mask or shield. And then we'll talk about some of the additional options available to enhance sort of what's available out of the box. So we'll highlight some of those additional add-ons. So first is just to clarify the concept of the different types of security within Sage 300. So the two basic types are functional security, which is restricting what users can do in the system, and that's the typical security that we're most used to. You're going to give a user access to a particular module, but not another module, or perhaps within a module, you'll give some users view-only access, or maybe you'll give users the ability to post entries, but not maintain accounts, whether those be GL accounts or vendors or customers, right? So those again are focused on the function, what the user can do and what you don't want to allow them to do. But where this gets more interesting and potentially allows you to manage things a little bit better as you spread the use of the application out to other users, maybe non-finance users in the organization, you maybe want to go beyond that, and that's where data security sort of comes into play. And that concept is going beyond just what they can do, but getting a little more granular in terms of when they're doing that function, what they can see. An example might be that you might want to shield certain types of information from certain users. Maybe you don't want them to see all the GL accounts. So maybe you have department heads or managers of specific locations, and you want to restrict them to just certain general ledger accounts within that department or location, perhaps, or program, depending on how you're organized. And that can be a security concept. It can also be just a data validation concept and applying some guardrails. Often the concern when you're rolling direct access to the system out to non-financial folks, the concern is about are they going to know what choices to pick? And so some of these data security options can again provide those guardrails and just make sure that they're using the accounts that are assigned to them, or the customers or vendors or employees or what have you that are assigned to them. Okay, so that's just clarifying those two different types of security. So then the other thing we'll talk about during the session is the different types of controls. And in the accounting sphere, we typically talk about two types: detective controls versus preventive controls. And so detective controls are the ones that you simply need to find out, perhaps after the fact, whether or not something happened. It's not critical that you sort of deal with it at the time, but you simply want to know whether some activity has happened or a certain type of transaction has happened, so that you can highlight it, review it, maybe go back and review it. And it's not critical to deal with it right at the time. The preventive control, on the other hand, is something that you want to sort of intercept the action and either stop a particular thing from happening, or guide that action maybe through an approval process or something. And so we'll talk about both types during the session, some examples of both types. Okay, so let's look at some of the newish security options available in some of the last 1, 2, 3 versions or so. Enhanced security has been a focus over the last couple of versions. So one of the changes is that security is now mandatory in the latest versions of Sage, which means that you can't have your Sage installation with a passwordless login, right? Just free for all, anyone can log in. So having security enabled is mandatory. So all users will have to have a password and will have to log in with some sort of authentication into Sage. There's minimum password lengths and complexity that are now enforced, and those are tweakable as well, but there is a minimum level that is required. Under the hood, the system, there's been some sort of behind the scenes improvements to security in terms of the way user data, user credentials are stored. It's more secure now. And also the way that Sage interacts with the backend database and reads and writes data to it, that is now more secure as well. So again, just some under the hood behind the scenes things. And then another option that isn't quite so new, has been around for a few versions now, is the ability to do single sign-on. And the advantage of single sign-on, which is called Windows authentication in Sage 300, it's basically passwordless sign-on. So instead of having users have another password to remember, and perhaps they make those weak passwords or they're reusing passwords, you can enable single sign-on, which means that users will be authenticated based on their Windows login. So you're leveraging any policies and security that you've got attached to your regular Windows or network login. And Sage will simply rely on that. It's basically asking Windows who you are and validating your Sage security based on that. Your Windows login is sort of connected or linked to your Sage 300 login, and so you don't have to enter a password and log in. It simply knows who you are. So the other feature that has been added recently is user activity logging. So this is one that gets asked about with a fair bit of frequency. And so what this is monitoring sort of like a breadcrumb trail of a user's activity inside Sage 300. And I'll differentiate what this is and what it isn't. People tend to come at this from a couple different angles. What it is not is full logging of everything that someone is doing and what data they're changing, what they changed and when. It's not that. This is a high level of logging. And what it's tracking is when someone logged in, what screens they opened, when they opened those screens, when they closed the screens, and when they logged out. Okay? And so that is an optional thing that you can enable, again, in the latest versions. It is not turned on by default. So if you are interested in that level of logging, it is something that can be enabled, again, depending on whether you have one of the later versions that supports it. If you have it turned on, you'll get something like this, a reporting capability that you can filter by date and by user. And you'll see this type of activity, date and timestamps, which company, when the user logged in and out, what computer name they logged in from, or IP address on your network. And then it'll just, again, monitor sort of the breadcrumbs of, that their trail through the system. They went over and launched this screen, then they closed that screen. So it's not going to tell you, what specific parameters on a report they ran. It's not going to tell you what data that they entered into a screen. It's just going to tell you that they went to that screen. Okay, so it's a nice level of information, but it is not a full level of auditing. And we'll talk about what the options are for that in a little bit later. Okay, so let's look at some of the things that you can do as far as data security and restrictions in Sage. Again, going beyond just locking a user out of a certain module or a certain function within a module. Again, we're going that level deeper about what data they can access and what they can see and what they can't see. Okay. So when we're talking about things that will restrict data, what it basically does is hides the data from the user completely, so that the user doesn't know whether the data is there or not. From their point of view, it looks like the data just doesn't exist. And so from what's available in Sage, the two examples of this that are available out of the box are general ledger accounts and payroll employees. Okay. So that example that I spoke about earlier about restricting, a department head or a manager to their program, cost center, location, division, whatever it happens to be in your organization, they would just see again their subset of accounts or employees if it's within payroll that are assigned to them. And they would just simply not see the rest of the accounts or the remaining employees. And from their point of view, it would look like they just didn't exist in the data. Okay? And the system would simply report that same message. If they tried to type in a GL account that wasn't assigned to them, it would simply tell them that the GL account doesn't exist, which is not entirely accurate, but from their point of view, it's like it doesn't exist. So the general ledger account option, it's quite flexible. So you can do it by range of accounts. You can do it by, again, department, division, location, et cetera. You can do it for specific things if you want to shield maybe just, your salaries and wages GL accounts from, all but the key, finance users, but let them have access to other GL accounts. So it's quite flexible in terms of how you can configure it and take advantage of that. And again, very helpful when you're trying to extend the ERP system out to more users within the organization, really leverage that as a single point of truth, and have more users participating and working real time with all of the data, but giving you that option of having some guardrails and some safety. Finance users tend to get protective and nervous about their data and giving access to it to other non-financial users. So these are some good options to address those concerns. So those are the two data restriction options that you get out of the box, general ledger accounts and payroll employees. The payroll employees option is good for, if you want to maybe restrict access to executive pay role, again, to maybe a more senior payroll person, or divvy up, again, you could use it to divvy up duties based on, divisions or locations as well. So then we get into the second type of security or restrictions, which are masking options. And the idea here is to deal with, data that's maybe sensitive. So it's not a question of, restricting it entirely so that the user, just doesn't know what's there. It's more a case of let's just make sure that only the minimum number of people have access to this type of information, because it's sensitive information. And in 2023, there's lots of concerns about identity theft and fraud and stealing data. So we just want to make sure we're being responsible with things like social insurance numbers, banking information, et cetera. So some of the options that are available to you when it comes to those sorts of things, last year's payroll update added some options to payroll if you're running Sage 300 payroll that allow you to mask SIN numbers. So again, if you want to be very cautious about that, you can still allow someone to do the bulk of the payroll processing, but not see an employee's SIN number, for example. So on any screens, they would see it masked, not completely hidden. It would look against something like what's showing here with the asterisks, kind of like what you'd see on a credit card receipt, right, where you see the last few digits. So it would allow them to, see and know that the SIN number had been properly populated and captured, but they're just not able to see it or edit it. The other thing that update did was give you the same option for banking information. So again, if you wanted to be very cautious and restrict the entry and maintenance of that information to specific users and maybe not give it to a junior level payroll clerk, then you have that option as well. Okay, and again, they would see that data is there. They would see that the employee is configured for direct deposit and that a bank has been set up, but just some of that data would be masked or hidden from them, so they couldn't see the actual bank account number. A recent update has also provided the same option on the vendor profile for tax numbers, which might be social insurance numbers if you have sole proprietors, contractors, and you have to do CPRS reporting and capture that information. So again, you have the ability to just be very cautious with how you're handling that and mask that information from to only the people that need access to it. If you're using the ORCID EFT module for managing EFT processing within accounts payable and accounts receivable for your vendors and customers, that module has for quite a while, perhaps since its inception, offered masking and encryption options of, again, that sensitive banking information data, so that you can restrict that data to specific employees. The idea being you could have, again, a more senior person responsible for setting up that banking information, and then have perhaps a more junior level payables clerk manage the day-to-day payables processing without having access to that banking. So lots of good options around protecting sensitive information without hindering your ability to operate day-to-day. Inventory costs has been one that's been available in the system, I think, since again, very early on. And that's the same idea. If you want customer service reps, salespeople, perhaps even warehouse folks to operate in those operational modules, inventory and sales orders and purchase orders. Purchase orders, might be difficult in terms of costing. But again, if you want people to be able to enter orders, take orders, pick orders, do those sorts of things, and see inventory data, but without seeing costing, if you're sensitive about that, about hiding your internal costs, then that is an option that, again, has always been available. So you can disable that, and it will just hide all of the costing fields on the various screens that they have access to. So outside of those options, the other masking or restricting options available in the system, there are some good customizability tools that are available out of the box. And the key function there is a function called user profile customization, and that allows you to pull up a particular screen, and if there's a field that you want to hide from a particular user, that could be for security reasons. It could even just be for simplicity for certain users, and this can be done user by user or by role. You can simply turn off certain fields on screens so that users can't see those fields. Just keep in mind that this is, there are certain considerations when setting this up, so you need to make sure that you're being consistent with hiding those fields, not just on screens, but also in reports and, and things like finders as well, so that, there's a few different ways to get at some of that information. And if you're doing this user profile customization function, you're really responsible for making sure all that is done. And that's, of course, where we can help you make sure you have a holistic view of that. But there are, again, some good options out of the box to do some additional tweaking of that. So let's look at what's available beyond sort of what's in the box of Sage. So with Sage 300, there's a very rich variety of third-party options, compatible solutions out there in the marketplace. And so there's a couple of good ones that sort of fall into this category. The first one is an audit logging product, and that goes beyond that user activity logging that we were talking about earlier and goes much deeper down to a data level. And so if you want to see when someone changed, a customer's credit limit, and who did that and when, and see all the changes to that credit limit over time, then this module can do that for you. It can audit virtually any piece of data inside the core Sage modules. It can track when someone's added a piece of data, when they've changed a piece of data, or when they've deleted it. It'll track who changed it and when, and it'll also capture the before and after. So that's something that's lacking in terms of the audit trails built into Sage. It'll show you who posted transactions and things, and you can see who the last person to edit, a customer or an employee was, but it doesn't really tell you, that will not tell you out of the box what they changed or when it was changed, or that someone else had changed it, a day previously. So this audit logging tool gives you that deeper level of auditing, and again allows you to audit virtually everything in the system. The caveat there, of course, is that auditing a large amount of data fields is adding a fair bit of overhead to the system, depending on the volume. So you just want to be a little judicial and focus on specific areas of concern. Certainly not transaction level activity, because Sage 300 does a pretty good job of audit stamping that information already. So you're going to want to focus on master file data, things like customers, employees, vendors, GL accounts, those sorts of things. But that module is quite powerful at doing that. Okay. So that is an example of a detective control, right? So it's going to capture that information and allow you to report on it after the fact, but it's not going to stop or restrict anybody. Okay. So if you have certain types of data where, again, you want to do prevention and you want to make sure it's done right the first time, or provide some rules into how it's done, then the alternative would be something that is going to manage that rather than just report on it after the fact. And there are some really good solutions in that area as well. Those tend to be workflow type solutions that are going to guide users through how to perhaps issue a purchase order, route it to folks that have the capability to approve those types of transactions, those types of changes. And again, manage that as it's happening rather than just reporting on it after the fact. And so there's, again, quite a few solutions here depending on your particular needs. There are ones that are tailored to specific workflows. There's accounts payable automation solutions. Some of you may have seen, the Beanworks is a good example of that. Sage, the branded Sage AP automation solution. There's purchasing workflow solutions. There are ones that do employee type information, things like time cards or leave requests or requisitions, those sorts of things. So quite a few really good solutions there. And there's also a good one that can be used fairly generically to really workflow just about anything in Sage. So in that example of changing a customer credit limit instead of just reporting on it after the fact. Again, that detective control with the audit logging capability, you might have designed a little workflow that says if someone goes to change a credit limit and it's more than a certain type of change or above a certain amount, then it's got to be approved by somebody first. And it's a nice solution that just works directly within the Sage 300 user interface. No additional screens really required. And what it simply does is it captures the user's change, and instead of writing it to, say, the customer profile, it'll just capture it and keep it off to the side until that workflow plays through and it gets approved, and then it will write it once the approval happens. So it's quite a nice little solution that enables you to do sort of any type of workflow that you can design right within Sage. Okay, and then one last little bit here. We're down to our last 5 minutes here before we'll leave time for some questions. There is a whole other security suite that will allow you to restrict data. So beyond the GL accounts and the payroll employees that we talked about earlier, there are add-on modules that will allow you to do that same type of concept, that guardrail concept, to display only data that the user needs to see, and do that same sort of filtering and hiding for banks, vendors, customers, inventory items and locations, restricting to just specific inventory price lists, and restricting them to certain sales and purchases transactions. So there's a whole suite that does that, and that's again quite powerful. Again, especially if you have multiple divisions or locations and you just want to have that extra layer of control to make sure that folks are just working in the area that they should be working in.